Miami Dolphins fans should be very excited about what we're talking about today. It all has to revolve around safety Minkah Fitzpatrick. Obviously, this has been an interesting player because he was drafted by Miami, had a falling out with Brian Flores, gets traded to the Steelers, gets traded back to Miami this offseason in the Jalen Ramsey, Jonnu Smith deal. And early on in the year, it felt like he didn't want to be here and he didn't want to get traded back here in the offseason as well. But this might have changed because after the Saints game, speaking in the locker room, there was a clip put out by Dolphins media, and Minkah was clipped saying, "No other group I would rather be doing this with. No other group. Love y'all. Let's keep stacking. Let's bang out these last 5 games." And I think Minkah Fitzpatrick has fully bought in to the Dolphins locker room and being here as the season has gone on. I'm sure in the first month of the year he has not enjoyed the losing that has happened, but as Miami has continued to keep the steady course, play better football, even though it's still not great football, it is better football, and they've been able to win 4 of their last 5 games, I think Minkah has seen the possibilities with some of these young guys growing in the locker room and might ultimately want to stay here rather than maybe leave this offseason by getting traded or mutually parting ways and the Dolphins release him, because I thought that was a real possibility. But he might want to stay now, and we'll talk more about it here in a second. But we are taking on the Jets this week in Week 14, and we are doing a like battle with Patrick Seatman in the Jets Report. Who can get the most likes on this video and throughout the week? Let's not lose to the Jets here. I hate the Jets. Brian Aycock hates the Jets. Hit that thumbs up icon. But remember, and the reason why we're talking about this and this quote delivered by Minkah Fitzpatrick is like it did really feel like he was checked out. Not in terms of the way he was playing, but in terms of the way he would lead inside the locker room. If you remember, actually, after the game against the Panthers in Week 5, when Miami blew that 17-point lead in the first half, Minkah Fitzpatrick did not speak to the media following that game. Well, that is not standard NFL protocols. So it just felt like there was a disbanding inside the locker room. Minkah wasn't really being the leader and the veteran that we know he is, but that seems to have all changed. And it also helps he has been flat out phenomenal this season for the Miami Dolphins. He has quietly put together one of the best seasons in the NFL at the safety position, and this is for Minkah playing 2 different positions. We'll talk more about the change from being a safety to basically a nickel corner, but he's been awesome this year. If you just look at his PFF grades and compare it to all the safeties that have played at least 50% of 830 snaps this year, which is 67 safeties, Minkah is the second highest overall graded in overall, 3rd in coverage, and 15th in run defense. Just been a top 5 safety in the NFL this year. And I think we're going to make a video about it in the next couple of days, how Miami dodged a bullet with that trade because Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith haven't been solid for Pittsburgh this season. But Minkah in Miami has not only been an elite safety, but he's been a Swiss Army knife. He has played virtually everywhere for Anthony Weaver in this Dolphins defense this season. And it's been so important because we've had so many different players on this Miami depth chart go in and out of the lineup due to play and injury. I mean, Minkah at this point has played more snaps in the slot as a nickel corner than his natural free safety position. Now, it's not that big of a difference, but it is very close. But look at this as well at the bottom here. He's played inside the box 167 snaps. His ability to bounce around has been pivotal for the Dolphins defense, especially since they've turned it around over the past 6 weeks. And he has really been able, almost by himself, to hold this secondary together. Because you have had so many players, whether it happened in training camp or throughout the regular season, get hurt and miss time. I mean, you look at the injured cornerbacks throughout the year for Miami, and we're not even mentioning the safeties like Ifeatu Melifonwu, Ashton Davis, who have been hurt. But Kohou out for the year in the training camp portion of the season. Same thing with Artie Burns. Storm Duck missed a lot of time, and he's out for the year now. Juju Brents is out for the year. Jason Marshall Jr. had an IR stint. Rasul Douglas missed a couple of games. Cornell Armstrong on IR. Kendall Sheffield on IR. Like, you have had 8 corners from training camp to now miss at least 2 games throughout the year. But Minkah Fitzpatrick has been there every single game. He has played in all 12 games for Miami, and it's been key for the Fins. And I mentioned how he's been basically a nickel corner this year because of all the injuries to the cornerback position. Well, how about these elite coverage stats? Sure, the completion percentage when targeted is high, giving up 13 completions in 20 attempts, or targets, you should say, but only 8.3 yards per catch. I mean, he hasn't allowed more than 200 yards this season. Only 1 touchdown. He has an interception to 4 PBUs. But by the way, if you count the pick 2 against the Saints that almost sealed that game essentially, then he would have 2 interceptions. Like, the Dolphins defense absolutely changed when Minkah Fitzpatrick was moved primarily to nickel. Now, this would not have happened if Miami stayed healthy, because if Jason Marshall Jr. doesn't go on IR, Cornell Armstrong doesn't go on IR, Minkah probably stays at that free safety roaming position. So it was like Miami was forced to put him in the nickel where things have changed. But it has been a revelation for this Dolphins defense. The official switch happened in that Week 5 game against the Panthers. So, yeah, the Dolphins defense still gave up 27 points to Carolina in Week 5, and they still gave up 29 points in Week 6 to the Chargers. But if you look at the difference between the first month to the last 2 months, the defense has went from the second worst defense in the NFL, the only defense they were better than in the first month of the year was the Dallas Cowboys, to, I would argue, an average defense. They're 15th in EPA per play. Sure, they're still bottom half in the NFL in EPA per dropback, but they're top 10 in the NFL now in EPA per rush. They have made an absolute switch to being a top half defense in the NFL and a top 10 run defense in the league. And you can make the argument, well, a lot of this might be because of the competition has gone down, right? You're playing the Falcons, you're playing the Commanders, you're playing the Saints, but it's not with that running back portion. I mean, you've played elite running backs. You've played Bijan Robinson. You've played Derrick Henry. You've played James Cook. Yet you're still putting together over the last 2 months elite displays of defense, especially on the ground. Ever since they got lit up by Kamani Vidal and Rico Dowdle in Week 5 and Week 6, they have been exceptional on the ground. And this defense is actually a legit solid defense now. Is it elite? No. But it is like an average defense, which is what we just asked for them to be before the season, because we know the personnel wasn't as good as it was in the past. More coming here in a second, but this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It is the holiday season, bowl games, playoff pushes, basketball matchups, and there's a lot going on, and you can be right where it feels good to be right over on Prize Picks. Your fantasy football season might be over. I made the playoffs, but if you didn't, you don't have to wait until next year to hit on projections every week, and there's no draft required where you could just pick your favorite players and win on Prize Picks. I have an entry in for Week 14, less than Breece Hall rushing yards, more than Devon Achane receiving yards, more than Jalen Waddle receiving yards as well. That's my 3-player entry. You just pick more or less on at least 2-player stats, and if you get your picks right, you could cash in. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Now, so far, I have outlined how good Minkah Fitzpatrick has been. And I highlighted that quote from Minkah in the locker room after the game as good news because it seems like he is locked in potentially not only now with Miami, but going forward. But there is a couple questions that you have to ask and answer if you're the new Dolphins GM that comes in following the season. Because Minkah has a pretty high price point for next season. And are you willing to pay him that price point when he's going to be 30 years old? And he's been so effective at nickel this year. Are you willing to pay this contract for a nickel corner? And if you are not, are you okay moving him back to free safety where the Dolphins defense has not been as good this season? Well, first let's talk about the contract. He has an $18.8 million cap hit next season, but only $3.2 million in guaranteed money, $15.6 million base. So Miami could technically release him post June 1st and save $15.6 million against the cap. But if they cut him prior to June 1st, the way the contract is structured, you will only save about $5.6 million and you will face $12.9 million in dead money. So to me, if you're moving on from Minkah Fitzpatrick, it's likely going to be a post June 1st trade or a post June 1st cut. And if you do end up keeping him, are you playing him at nickel? Because if you play him at nickel, Minkah Fitzpatrick would ultimately be the highest paid or a top 3 highest paid nickel corner in the NFL. When you talk about valued positions across the league, nickel corners are important, but they aren't getting $20 million per year. Hell, they're not even really getting $15 million per season. That would put him around the top paid nickel corner in the NFL. So to me, it's a little bit hard to justify keeping him on this current contract that he's on for 1 year and planning to play him at the nickel. It should probably be something where you restructure his contract again or you move him back to safety. And that's kind of where I line here in the matter. You could cut him, as I mentioned, and save $15.6 million, but I do want to keep Minkah with how well he is playing. And I would not restructure his contract because I mentioned he is going to be 30 years old. I would be fine putting him back at safety. Because although Miami's defense was the second worst defense in the NFL the first month of the year when Minkah was primarily playing safety, I do not blame Fitzpatrick. Because when you look at his numbers and grades and his film in the first 4 weeks of the season, it shows an elite safety. He was the second highest graded guy in weeks 1 through 4, and he was the third highest coverage safety in that span as well, out of 59 qualified safeties. So it's not like he was playing poorly at that position. Sure, he declined his last couple of years at the free safety position in Pittsburgh, but he showed a rejuvenation this year in Miami at that position. So I would be fine keeping him at that price point for 1 more year, which is all he has left on his deal, and moving him back to safety and finding a different player to take over that nickel cornerback spot. Rounding out the show, but make the call. Should Miami keep Minkah Fitzpatrick through the 2026 season? Type Y for yes or type N for no. I absolutely would keep him, as I've noted. Because not only is he still playing at a very high level for the Miami Dolphins at both nickel and at free safety this season, but he has also been growing this year as the season has progressed as a leader. He has led this defense as we've seen players go in and out of the lineup, as Jalen Phillips got traded. And to me, I think you're able to build a more sustainable defense with Minkah at safety, where you can put him in the box at times. You can still play him at nickel in certain personnel groupings and formations, but you could also find a corner to put in that nickel spot that isn't such a downgrade to where you go back to having a bottom 5 defense in all of football. But I also think a lot of that defensive struggle for Miami in the first month of the season was due to their inability to get any push from their defensive line and those young D linemen and Zach Sealer really struggling. They're now playing much better football. Jordan Phillips, Kenneth Grant, Zach Sealer. But if you're looking at potential nickel corners for next season, you can try to run back Jason Marshall Jr., who has really struggled this season but looked solid early to be that nickel guy. You can also bring back Kader Kohou, or you can go to the draft or a different free agent corner like Alontae Taylor from the Saints or D. Alford from the Atlanta Falcons, who have been solid nickel corners in their career, both about 24, 28 years old, respectively. Like, I think bringing back Kader Kohou is a very solid option. I know he's coming off major knee surgery, that being an ACL, but that also will make him very cheap. Like, I don't think a lot of teams are going to go out there and sign Kader Kohou to a big multi-year contract or even a big 1-year deal when he's coming off ACL surgery. He's still only going to be 27 years old next season, and I would very well bring him back on a 1-year deal. Like, I think you're going to bring him back potentially on a 1-year, $6-7 million contract. And to me, that is extremely good value for a player that has been one of the best nickel corners in all of the NFL this past 5 years. He knows the Anthony Weaver defensive scheme. Weaver will be back next season in all likelihood if McDaniel returns, which it seems like he might. all bets are off if the Dolphins do end up firing McDaniel. But if Weaver's back, I would imagine Kader Kohou returns as well because Miami will likely have to bargain shop at certain positions. And I think they're going to be able to do that at nickel corner with Kader Kohou because he's not going to have a high price point this offseason. That will do it for today's show. Appreciate all the Dolphins fans hanging out with us here today. If you want more content, make sure you subscribe because we'll have video out tomorrow and we'll be live again on Thursday. So join us.